The Epilogues. Getting away with it. It's not where you're from, it's where you're at. Ian Brown. The doctor woke up. In the vicarage, a comfy place full of dusty furniture and gauche china ornaments. He was lying on a sofa under a tartan blanket. Trelaw was peering down at him in concern. "Is everything all right?" the Time Lord muttered. "Everything is fine," the Reverend assured him. "You try to sleep." "Yes." The doctor lay back, the muscles of his face relaxing. "Used the Timewyrm's power to restructure reality. Never happened. One casualty. That's too many." "Doctor," Trelaw adjusted the pillow underneath the sleeping man's head. "It could have been so much worse." And for a moment Trelaw glimpsed a dark figure out of the corner of his eye. A hooded man vanishing into shadow. He was nodding, his one eye gleaming with approval. His hard lesson had been taught. It was almost something that Trelaw could have put into a sermon. War knows no morality. Trelaw crossed himself. Glancing at the calendar, he hoped that the doctor would recover soon. The Reverend would be busy tomorrow. In his dreams, the doctor saw a table, a big oak thing in a banqueting hall. The third doctor was entertaining the ferryman, who, as they both knew, was actually the fourth doctor, should he have wished to keep his proper name. "Spacious," declared the fourth doctor, his eyes twinkling over a glass of wine. "Tell me, don't you feel lonely living here all by yourself?" The third doctor sipped from his glass thoughtfully. "No, old chap," he muttered. "I rather enjoy the solitude." In his sleep, the doctor nodded gently. Ace was wandering through the snow-covered churchyard, wrapped in one of Peter's overcoats. It had been 8 hours since she had returned to the land of the living, and the doctor had still been asleep when she left him 2 hours ago. It was good to have real time back. From the dense white clouds, the first flecks of new snowfall were swirling down, stinging her face and lips. She suddenly dived forward onto the ground and kissed the snow, tasting it. All these snowflakes, all different, all so short-lived, but all beautiful. From a distance they all looked the same, but close up they were all so complex and different. The creeps she had invited into her comfy old fantasy of ordinary life would never have bothered to notice that. A child would bundle these snowflakes up and throw them at another child. And that was cool if you were a kid, no harm in that. But she wasn't a child anymore. She had come back. She stood up, brushing the snow off the coat. She wouldn't have come up here if she hadn't known the doctor was going to be all right. Known it in her bones. Did he know how she was going to die? Had he looked it up on one of those dark nights? Did it matter? Looking down at the village, at the Christmas trees glimpsed through windows and the colourful lights that illuminated the frontage of the Black Swan, a very modern pub now, Ace wanted to run down to a phone and call everyone that she loved and tell them. She wanted to eat a massive bacon sandwich, to arrange a vast explosion of fireworks, to dance and snog her head off. One day she would die. Taken suddenly and sweetly, she hoped. That was okay. Even better if she didn't, mind. Like a character at the end of her book, she would stop doing things. What she had achieved, for good and bad, would have to do. What she did, what she was going to do in this astonishing world, would be as strong and beautiful as a snowflake. Ace grinned up at the rising moon, pushed her hands deeper into the pockets of the coat, and ran down the hill towards the vicarage, blowing kisses at the sky. Peter Hutchings stood watching from the door of the spare bedroom as Emily fed Ishtar from a bottle. Ishtar. It sounded like a sneeze. The doctor, while he was drinking lots of tea and burning crumpets at the vicarage, had explained that the Timewyrm would always exist as some sort of basic universal principle, but it would remain unconscious, at least until the time of darkness. The human portion, that which had created the creature in human time, was now inhabiting the baby's brain. To do so, it had had to jettison much of its memory, its personality, everything but bare life. Ishtar Hutchings would grow up exactly like any other baby, give or take the odd nightmare. Emily was over the moon, of course. Yeah, now there was an expression that Peter wouldn't be able to use straight-faced again. His wife had coped with the whole experience better than he had, handling it with her usual practicality. She glanced up at him, smiling. He smiled back and wandered in to say hello again to his new daughter. He stood at the base of the hill on which St. Christopher stood, his back to her as she descended. Maybe he was thinking, going over the terrible experiences they'd gone through. Or maybe he was planning again, constructing another elaborate campaign to rid the universe of evil. Ace decided that she would probably never know what he thought, or even how he thought. The doctor turned round as she tripped down the hill behind him. His eyes sparkled in the first dark of evening, and his face held an expression of sad wisdom. He looked at her for a long moment. Ace noticed that his eyes had returned to their normal, brilliant blue. "Hello," he said finally. "I'm the doctor, and this is my friend Ace." The two adventurers held each other for a long time, and then, wrapped about each other still, they tramped back to the vicarage. Far above them, Saul was sounding the first bells of Christmas Eve. The evening was a blur of food, drink and song, both at the Hutchings household and the bar of the real Black Swan, which the doctor had entered with some trepidation. Ace spent ages on the vicarage phone trying to discover Johnny Chess's home number without success, and the doctor treated everyone to an improvised rendition of The Holly and the Ivy on the spoons. Ishtar Hutchings cried a lot. Ace woke in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve, suddenly afraid. There was a noise in the room. Reaching for her rucksack, she switched on the bedside light. The doctor was filling one leg of her tights with apples and oranges. "Tradition," he smiled uncomfortably. "Or are you too old for that sort of thing?" "No." Ace smiled, turning over and going back to sleep. "Wicked." On Christmas Day, after an enormous dinner that the Hutchingses had prepared, Ace tiptoed out into the hall and looked at their telephone. She had never forgotten the number. After all she had been through, maybe she should just call home, say that she was still alive. Maybe they'd care. She lifted the receiver and dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Somebody picked it up. It might have been a man's voice on the other end of the line, or it might not. Ace had put the phone down again before she heard more than a syllable. Emily stepped out into the hall and tried to step back into the lounge again, instantly aware that something was wrong. "I was just..." Ace spoke to her and Emily stopped. "I was just looking at your phone. It's a great phone. It really is a bloody wonderful phone, that." The tears were running down her cheeks painfully, her face screwed up against the hurt inside her. Emily gently led her along the hall to the room where Ishtar was sleeping. They sat down on the bed, and Ace reached out to tuck the baby in where she had pushed the cover aside. "I thought I was okay now," Ace whispered. "After all that, I thought I could face anything." "Family's different." Emily stroked her hair, fixing strands that had gone astray back in place. "Maybe that's something the doctor will have to deal with eventually too." She looked seriously into the eyes of the woman from Perivale. "I've been meaning to say, I know you're a bit old for this, and it's a bit of a cheek, but I feel like I've known you for a very long time. Please," Ace rubbed her brow, "please say it anyway. You could stay here with us. I wouldn't mind another daughter or a long-lost younger sister if the neighbours start to do their sums." "I know," said Ace, hugging Emily, "but I don't like to think what would happen to the doctor without me. He needs somebody to take care of him. He really does. Besides, you've already got one new mouth to feed." Ace stood up, purposefully wiping her tears on her sleeve. Maybe there were some pains that made you, that defined what you were. She turned back to Emily as she reached the door. "Thanks for asking," she blurted, and left before she started again and woke the baby. The doctor and Ace made quite a few short trips in the TARDIS during this time, doing what the doctor called looking after the details with hindsight. They broke into a genetics lab in the 22nd century, and stole a female baby, grown artificially, without sensory input, to leave her in a mindless husk. This, the doctor told Ace, was so the doctors involved could experiment on her with a clear conscience. Ace wanted to duck inside St. Christopher's on that fateful Sunday with the baby, but the doctor insisted that since Emily remembered him doing it, he had better go through the whole process just to make sure. He bundled the baby that would become Ishtar up, closed his eyes and dashed inside the church. Crossing timelines always made him feel uncomfortable. As Saul mentally called to him, he steeled himself not to say that everything would be okay. He didn't want to go through the whole business again. They placed an advert in the NME of the far future, and the doctor mentioned that he had indeed read Ace's copy when she'd lent it to him, noticed the warning contained in it, and realised that eventually it would mean something. "It pays to advertise," grinned Ace, looking at the brand new copy of the paper outside Ladbroke Grove Hypertube Station. "Hey, what's this, Professor? Wanted, short man with bizarre dress sense, extreme lifestyle and police box? Must play the spoons. No time wasters." "What?" The doctor grabbed the paper and Ace ruffled his hair. "Got you," she laughed. The doctor frowned at her. The brick was cold, gritty and hard through Chad Boyle's mitten. His raised hand was silhouetted against the low sun, so perhaps it was the sudden shade that made the girl turn. She screamed. Boyle savagely swung the weapon down. A hand caught his wrist and twisted the brick out of it. Chad managed a fleeting glimpse of a beautiful young woman, a scarf wrapped round her face, who pushed him over and then ran through the playground, diving out of the gate into the road. There a man waited for her. A man that Chad recognised from somewhere, maybe from a dream? He met the little boy's eyes and smiled a satisfied smile. Chad Boyle glanced back to see that Dottie had been surrounded by other girls who were glaring at him, saying that they'd tell on him to Miss Marshall, and how could he think about hitting a girl with a brick? Chad didn't know. Stupid idea. Got him in trouble for nothing. When he looked back to the road, the strange man was gone. "Yeah," muttered Ace, pulling the scarf from her face in the console room. "I remember now. I heard about Chad Boyle from Midge a long while back. His family moved up to Barnet before he reached seniors, and he went on to be editor of a local paper. According to Midge, he'd got his act together and was really nice. Why didn't I know that back in Dreamland?" "It wasn't true then," murmured the doctor. "You just made it happen." Greenwich Park shone white above London's grey towers. The doctor and Ace stood on either side of the meridian. The doctor's expression was thoughtful, as it had been for the last few days. The TARDIS had become increasingly difficult to control. Ace hardly dared to ask about the nighttime scratching at her door. "What year is it, Professor?" she asked instead. 1976, answered the doctor. "And no, you can't go and tell Sid Vicious to be more careful. He wouldn't listen anyway." "We're going to have to leave Sheldon Boniface soon, aren't we? I mean, permanently." "We can always pop back," muttered the doctor. "Old friends are like old china, very valuable, very fragile." "But you're off to do something else?" "Yes." The doctor looked at her suspiciously. "Do you want to come?" Ace looked at her trainers for a minute. "Yeah!" she finally grinned. "What have I got to lose?" They walked off, beginning a conversation about Newton's rose garden and the doctor's lack of belief in the I Ching and all sorts of things. Behind them, an awkward undergraduate wheeling his bicycle up the hill collided with a beautiful young woman. "Oh, excuse me," blurted Peter Hutchings, grabbing for the books the woman had been carrying. "I was just looking at that girl's jacket, those badges." He waved his arms vaguely. "Yes," Emily West nodded, smiling. "I was thinking exactly the same thing." She gathered up her belongings and was about to walk off. Then she turned around. "You look cold," she grinned. "Fancy a cup of coffee somewhere?" The Reverend Ernest Trelaw wiped away the final traces of the doctor's chalk pattern from the floor of St. Christopher's. The Time Lord and his companion had departed that bright January morning after the burial of Rupert Hemming's head. The doctor had stood by the grave like some dark angel, his face deep in thought. Perhaps he had learnt something after all. For himself, Trelaw was puzzling over how to write up the whole business for the church records. Perhaps Emily's novel would indeed be a better solution. "I think I'm starting to see it, Saul," began Trelaw. "The doctor was playing a game to ensnare the Timewyrm, using us all as his pawns." "He particularly took advantage of my ability to focus human psychic power," Saul chorused, sounding a little hurt. "Myself, Emily and the baby seemed far too perfect a combination to be the creation of mere chance, and too diabolical a conception for divine grace." "Indeed." Trelaw finished his work and stood up. "And the Timewyrm had a game plan too, to use you to help seize the Doctor's form, to consume the Earth. But above and beyond both their plans, someone had decided to teach the Doctor a lesson about conscience and the weakness of a warrior. I think that's all I'll write in the records." He moved to the door and glanced around the church, checking that everything was safe. Centuries in the past, humans had come to worship in the plot where Saul now lived. From the Celts, through the Romans and into the Saxons, men and women had bowed their heads to something far above, something grand that was made of what the universe was made of, and yet was part of their care and concern. With each religion, their specific belief had varied, but the faith had eternally been there. The Saxons brought stone and etched its dust into their hands with the heavy task of construction. The Normans had added their own architecture, and every age had laid its mark on the work in some form. All of them knew one thing, that there was something beyond themselves out in the night. Something good. Trelaw made his way to the vestry door, and as he touched the ancient wood, looked up at the billions of stars that glittered overhead in a holy arc of distant magic. He made small supplication to his god. Somewhere, sometime, there was a man among those stars who would fight for, and die for, the principle behind all this wonder. And in that moment, a star detached itself from the cosmos and dashed down to touch the earth below. Trelaw chuckled and closed the door. "You seem happy tonight," Saul sang into the still night air. "I went to see the Hutchingses. When I left, little Ishtar, she was sleeping so quietly." "That is good. Now you must sleep quietly yourself." Trelaw leant heavily on a pillar. "Yes, old friend, I must. I don't know if I can reach the vicarage. I'm so tired." "Then sleep here," Saul murmured. "I will keep you warm." Trelaw curled up in a pew, pulled over a prayer mat for a pillow, and closed his eyes. "Good night, Saul." "Good night. All is quiet. Sleep with pleasant dreams." And smiling, the Reverend did so, long ago in an English winter.